Hi, what you're about to see is an interview with a vendor in the space in and around data mesh. We'd like to thank Nick Heudecker for graciously doing these interviews with vendors. We'd also like to make it clear that the data mesh community and data mesh learning doesn't necessarily endorse anything that these vendors are talking about, but that we wanted to give them a voice to talk about what they may offer in the space, so people are aware of vendors, because obviously if everybody has to build everything themselves, the data mesh is going to be pretty hard. So with that, we really thank Nick for doing this great work, and we hope that this is good and useful to you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Data Mesh Learning Vendor Interviews. I'm Nick Heudecker. I work at Cribl, Senior Director of Market Strategy over there. If you want to know more about Cribl, you can find out up here. And today I'm joined by Milan from Keboola. Milan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Nick, for the introduction. My name is Milan. I'm one of the co-founders of Keboola, and I'm currently responsible for technology alliances. And thank you for having me.
Great to have you. So I'm not terribly familiar with Keboola. I know in the data mesh learning community Slack, you guys get into some trouble occasionally for saying you're a data mesh solution. But tell me about the company. Tell me about the product. How did you get here? Give me the whole scoop. Okay.
I'm glad to do that. Look, we started on this journey as a data consulting company, as many products in the space, right? And eventually we figured out this is really, really messy. We're talking 10 years ago now, right? Sure. Where there were ETL wasn't really a category at that point. Things were popping up, and companies like Fivetran were still very much in the future. We got sick of building the same things for customers and reinventing the wheel all the time. And because from the previous life of our company, we had a very strong developer team, we started using them. I was there as a consultant at the time. We started using them building tools for us rather than us selling their work doing custom implementations for customers. And fast forward, about 6 years ago, we made a conscious decision to become a SaaS provider, using this tooling and turning it into a platform. How does that lead itself into data mesh? Very, very interestingly, data mesh was a bit of a reveal for us. When we started learning more and more about it, very often I watch Jean-Marc's video and I'm like, exactly, that's exactly right. Right? Things were just evolving in a very, very similar way in our heads before the terminology was even there. And we found ourselves and leading our customers naturally without knowing these terminologies exactly the same way. And that's why we're here today.
It's interesting. I think a lot of companies, they stumble on data mesh and they're like, oh yeah, I intrinsically get it. Like it makes sense. Like all the friction that we experienced in traditional data architectures gets shifted, I think, more correctly into the teams that know the most about that data. So how long has the company been around offering a SaaS product today?
6-7 years, I think, is the fair assessment. We do have customers who've been with us for longer, but really they were licensing a piece of software from us. So officially as a SaaS provider, 6-7 years is probably a good estimate. It's a bit blurry. Okay. Like my background.
Is the company bootstrapped? Is it venture backed?
Yeah. Actually, we are customer funded from the beginning. We are looking at raising some money this year to accelerate our growth or maintain the speed we picked up last year after COVID. But as of today, we are bootstrapped.
Got it. So what does the product do? It sounds like it was the offshoot of a lot of consulting conversations and engagements. So what is the Keboola offering? What do you do?
That's a fantastic question. And, we've had a lot of very fruitful conversations with your previous employer, Gartner, trying to fit like, which category do you guys fit into? And there really wasn't one because we were sort of stretched all over the place. Right. So if you ask me today, which you just did, my answer is we are data stack as a service. right? Where a lot of the categories of the modern data stack are features from our point of view, or use cases that don't necessarily require a separate company. So that's what Keboola is, and its purpose really is to increase productivity of data teams, allowing cleaner teams to do more. And the way we are doing it is really reusing the knowledge which we already have and automate as much as we can. So we are reducing, and again borrowing for Zdeněk, the sort of cognitive load, meaning what is it that people need to know in order to build, top-notch data solutions.
So you described Keboola as a data stack as a service. To me, that's a lot. Like that's a big promise. You could be talking about, from the database to the BI and analytics layer. That could include data quality, data lineage, metadata management, governance tooling, all kinds of things. But that's a lot for one company to have to offer. So where do you fit? What specifically do you offer in more tightly? What do you do for data mesh enablement?
Okay, that's a very loaded question. As you're saying, it's a very, very loaded space. So let's start with what we don't do, right? We don't do the database. We don't do the data warehousing. We definitely partner with companies there. And we also don't do the data consumption. We wouldn't be competing with the Tableaus or Lookers or ThoughtSpots of the world. But there is a lot that also needs to happen in between. That is the process management, the integrations, the way you schedule workflows, the way you do an audit trail, the way you do version control over those things. And again, while we didn't necessarily set up to do all of those things, our underlying architecture led itself to really simplifying lots of this. And simplifying is the key word here, because once you simplify, while you reduce what people need to know in order to build a high quality workflow, it also makes it easier to democratize the infrastructure into those teams without necessarily having to have a center of excellence supporting them with talent and doing all of those things. We automate a lot of that and therefore make it easier for people with maybe less experience to create just as good data products as the company requires.
So a big story of data mesh is, we want to push tasks to the people who understand the data the best, but they may not have the technical skills to really do anything with that data. When you're talking to prospects and you're working with customers, is there a difference between the roles that you're selling to and the roles that you're training and enabling, or is it one and the same?
It's always different because there are much many more of those users than there are the buyers. A lot of what we are doing is, again, lowering the threshold of what people need to know in order to build the good things. Look, I'm actually not that technical. I can write SQL if you put a gun to my head, but I've built a fairly complex solutions because of all the knowledge I don't need to know. I don't need to know how to code Airflow. I don't need to know how to set up cloud environment, because the business logic, the business meaning of the data and what we are trying to do with it can be captured in some method like SQL or Python if we are going into data science. And a lot of the other stuff really the end user doesn't care about. And that's what we automate, and that's what we provide as a part of the service.
Okay, so what kind of roles are buying this type of solution? Is it chief data officers? Is it CIOs? Is it business unit heads? Who do you target?
Two main directions. We have what we call the direct business, where we are becoming part of the company's analytical environment. And then we are in the CIO, CDO direction, with the entry point sometimes being the business, because those are the people who have a problem that is visible because they're not getting what they need to get from their data team. That's how we might get in to solve a couple of those issues, and then we sort of spread through the company. And then we have our OEM business, where our platform is used as a part of somebody else's product. Sometimes you don't even know that it's Keboola behind the scenes. And then we would be talking to the CTOs and chief product officers.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So would you say that you are primarily involved in data product creation, or is it more around the federated computational governance? Is it data discovery? Is it more of that? I mean, or is it multiple fields that you cover in the data mesh story?
So everything's about creating the data product and accessibility to them. That's the important stuff. The rest is table stakes or features, right? Like, okay, you build the data products. Now, how do you discover them? Right? Again, if you have a unified foundation of how your data stack is operating, if you don't have 7 different tools, you don't need an 8th one just to deal with stuff like discoverability, or just to deal with stuff like data lineage, for example, or trust. So our world is much, much easier than that. So some of those categories don't exist as separate category because it's just a drop down somewhere, right? Like we don't need to integrate with a data catalog, because the way data is organized in Keboola automatically leads itself into discoverability.
So it sounds like if I want to use your service, your product, I'm leaving behind a lot of the things that I've already acquired. I've already integrated into my processes, like data catalogs that you mentioned, data lineage tooling. Some of these things may encompass multiple functional areas. Is it a rip and replace story, or is it something that people can adopt in a more piecemeal fashion and still get some good results from?
Certainly, we usually start with a relatively narrow space, and eventually we might replace some of those things that are no longer necessary. But rip and replace is usually not a good strategy unless there is some outside reason of already doing that, which is that the current environment is not working or failing in some way. Where we excel or work really well is when we are building on a greenfield, if you will, because again, instead of having to have a team of 7, to encompass all that knowledge, you can build something very similar with maybe a team of 2 or maybe just a 1 person. That's where we see the entry points, and sometimes we grow that company to a unicorn with tens or hundreds of users on our platform. But the entry is usually a small defined use case.
And so you mentioned, sometimes it's greenfield, and look, it's easy to excel in a greenfield environment, right? There's no legacy.
Agreed.
Would you say that those are mostly startups that you're working with on the greenfield side, or is it maybe a new product team at a company that is more receptive, or they have a greenfield environment?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it's some transformation is happening, right? Either we are trying to adopt new ways of working with data, or it could be even an enterprise with very mature environment which needs to move to a cloud, and suddenly there is a lot of institutional knowledge that organization needs to obtain, retain, and maintain to be able to do that. Well, we're saying, hey, don't build a data stack. Here is a data stack as a service for this new use case or for this new approach that you are trying to do. So it's always on a back end of some kind of change. Either we need a new data stack to support our business, or our licenses are expiring. Should we do this or should we do something else? Or we are failing to compete because we cannot plug in data science effectively into what we have today, and we are looking for changes. So we are trying to make always the transition as smooth as possible, and we are very happy to start with small use cases. Look, we have customers who are 1 person on our pay-as-you-go, and we have enterprises with hundreds of users and hundreds of different projects using exactly the same infrastructures.
Makes a lot of sense. When prospects seek you out, or they're more receptive to your message, what kind of pain are they experiencing? Right? What's the trigger event? You mentioned new projects and so on, but for existing environments where they're like, this is just not really working for me. What's the trigger?
What is the biggest problem in our space today? If I were to throw that question on you, what is it that
it's a loaded question, man. There's so many problems.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that whatever those problems are, people are trying to solve it with one single solution, and it's throwing more talent at it. And there just isn't enough talent out there, or it's not affordable, or it's not available. In some older article, or was it a conversation, we were talking about that the problem of the market is not necessarily that there isn't enough talent. There is a problem that the talent is bogged down with a lot of unnecessary work, which is what is happening today. So very often it comes to that, meaning, look, we have 6 month long or 6 month deep backlog of reporting requests from our business, and we just can't make any heads of it, right? Because we are building everything by hand, or because we just don't have the capacity to deal with that, or we lost part of our team. Now, how do we get everybody back? How do we get new people and get them up to speed? So quite often it's just that whatever is there is not working for the purposes or to fulfill the requirements of the business, if you will. It's too slow, or there just isn't the capacity itself.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, people are I think they're trying to resolve a lot of these data challenges. And I've said this before, right? By throwing tooling at a problem, throwing people at a problem, and they're getting very uneven results. And I think it's, if you're on the West Coast, if you're on the East Coast of the US, it's a little bit easier to find that talent. You're expecting to pay top dollar for it. I think if you're not in those big technology markets, that's like west of Sacramento, east of Philadelphia, it can be difficult to attract the talent that you need. And your challenges are just as acute. One thing I wanted to ask you about, this is something we talked about during our prep call, and surprise for everybody who's listening. Yes, we do a prep call, even though it may not sound like we do. You mentioned that, this idea of the modern data stack is really designed to benefit VCs, not customers. And I tweeted that comment. I didn't attribute it to you, but now here we are.
Thank you.
People asked a lot of questions. They were like, "Well, what do you mean? And what kind of direction is this going in? Is it just companies that are really designing features, not products? Is it some other kind of model?" So here's your chance to unpack that statement, which is frankly loaded. So what did you mean by when you said that the modern data stack is designed to help VCs, not customers?
There is a lot of money out there that is looking itself to be applied, and VCs like to make category bets, right? What is it that is who's going to win this category? So what you need is more categories. The modern data stack, in one recent article, I saw 12 different categories of tools, and I would argue that 6 of them exist not to bring business value, but to help mitigate the issues created by integrating the first 6, which are the ones that are actually doing something. Like if we go back to the beginnings of the modern data stack, right? The combination or the go-to-market of, at the time, Looker, Snowflake, and Fivetran, it's a very solid thing. Like, you do go best of breed, you combine those things together really, really well. But then, hey, there is something missing, right? Because there is always something missing in a space like that. And instead of those companies adopting it as a feature and expansion into that, they found out that they are so specialized in what they do that they just physically can't. So that what happened? Another category popped up, right? You have categories. Data catalog is a little specific because it obviously predates that, and it just adopted itself to the modern data stack. However, you have things like reverse ETL or data observability, right? Things like really, there are a lot of.
And they're invented categories. They really are. Like reverse ETL is an invented category.
Absolutely.
Data observability is just kind of, I see that as more of a response to, there's so many tools in the pipeline. I have no idea what's happening anywhere. Let's talk about some kind of oversight over these. Yeah.
No, exactly. Look, if you have the 3 tools, right, and then you say, hey, I need to run some transformations that I can't just do biometric layer. I need something in the middle, so I'll bring DBT into the picture, or whatever else. Now you have 4 tools already. Now you probably need 5th one just to do a user management, right? Because suddenly you have that issue, right?
Sure.
Once you have that, you're saying, okay, so what is my process monitoring? Well, each one has its own way of logging things. Each one of them has their own, might be sitting in different clouds, right? All of those things. So you're creating a lot of complexity, and the complexity here is the keyword, because I think we can safely argue that pretty much every single problem in the data stack is solved by multiple companies you can choose from, right? It's like they're literally, I cannot throw anything out there unless I invent completely new category, that there aren't, a whole bunch of companies already doing that. However, every time you add that feature, and in many cases it's just feature. Ethan Aaron from Portable had that comment on LinkedIn relatively recently about $1 billion feature, and it was a really, really good observation. Where, okay, hey, here is a feature that those companies cannot do for some reason, so let's build a company around it. We raise a whole bunch of money, and suddenly it's locked in, and we can't do anything with it anymore. And before you know it, we have 12 of those. And that's what is happening. And the reason why I'm saying that really this benefits the VCs better than the customers is that the customers are left with this complexity problem. It's their problem, right? Something doesn't work because the integration or a version of this changed. It's your problem, right? As a customer, like imagine going to IKEA, picking up random pieces, bringing them home and hope that they work. That is how people assemble data stacks today, or they hire a consultant that will take some of that responsibility onto them. But once that contract ends, again, it's the customer being left, holding the short stick here. But who benefits are the VCs, because if they didn't, they wouldn't invest into those companies, but they do because they obviously have, okay, there's a new category that's going to be fantastic and it's going to, win. And let's throw money at it.
In the IKEA example, right? Like you go to the store and they've got, mocked up apartments and mocked up living rooms and kitchens. And I think people see that, or they hear about, this is what Netflix is doing. This is what Pinterest is doing. And they feel like they can kind of maybe buy their way into that innovative culture and trying to accelerate their own engineering. So I have a lot of empathy for the end users who kind of get stuck with this stuff.
Oh yeah. Totally.
On the VC side, I feel like there's a lot of FOMO, right? Like they don't want to miss out on the next snowflake. And so they'll pump a lot of money into a Fivetran, right? And Fivetran's valued at more than the entire data integration market, right? By revenue. I think that's something like $3.6 or $3.8 billion a year. I don't know what Fivetran's most recent valuation is, but it's more. And so any data company, I think VCs are very eager to pump money into that. Company I used to work at, Gartner, just came out with their data, their database revenue. And it grew something like 22% year over year. And it's already an incredibly mature market, all driven by cloud. So it does look from the outside looking in, and some VCs really know the space well. They really, really do. Others don't, and they're just kind of cargo culting into these spaces. But I think that, it looks like it's going to grow infinitely for a very long period. So I think it's easy to see why they're doing it, but I think your point about, these are primarily features that don't do much else, and then the customers are stuck with this integration challenge makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. And you can see it as a trend, right? And you're talking about the infinite growth. I think that we are starting to see, and we have about 6 months ago, actually, it really started to show some cracks. So first of all, you have new companies popping into the market, which are coming with a similar thesis as ours and say, you can't build this. It's just way too complicated. Like what's our data just raised $15 million Series A, right? They're coming with exactly the same thesis. We've just been doing it for a bit longer. And they're not the only ones, right? Nextla that, you spoke to in the series, they are in very similar space and saying, okay, we are sort of more of an end-to-end solution here. And yes, end-to-end solutions have bad names from the past, but we are starting to get prospects that come to us and say, hey guys, I'm in a new role. I'm supposed to build a data stack. In my previous company, I've done it the modern data stack way, and it's really not what I want to do again, right? Because the whole concept of the modern data stack from the customer's point of view is to solve the problem you see now. It's very, very easy. You will need a data warehouse, so buy one, right? they'll buy something. It really depends more on how good the sales guy is than on their actual needs. And they'll say, okay, now I need to get my data into it. What are my data sources? Okay, Fivetran is a great solution. And these two extra ones, how they get stitched, right? They already have 3 tools at this point. And they have no idea what's coming to them. What is the future complexities and how they are designing themselves in the corner along the way until they eventually end up in the situation that maybe rip and replace is going to be all that they'll be able to do. The amount of technical debt accumulated in this process just becomes crippling for the organization. And then usually the architect leaves, right? Because they don't want to deal with it anymore. They enjoy the process of building, but the maintenance is a bitch. Sorry about that, right?
I mean,
the company again is left with, in a very, very unpleasant situation.
And you're never done with your data stack ever. Like you're never done with your data warehouse. You're never done with your data stack unless your business is dead, right? You're always evolving. You might get acquired. You might make acquisitions. You may open up a new office in a different geographic region, and all that puts new pressure on all this data. One thing I will say, you talked about, data observability and just as I was leaving my analyst role, there was data ops that was becoming an interesting topic. It's easy to be cynical about those things, and I am, but I think there's value there still because it forces people to think about their problems maybe differently, right? If other people in an organization have been resistant to having a conversation about data or how things get integrated or how things are available. Talking about data observability, talking about data ops, at least lets you have a different conversation or reintroduce the topic. And so while we can sit here and mock them, and we do, there can be value there if you pitch them correctly. So I still think it's worth, letting these new terms kind of percolate for a while and then seeing what kind of advantages, as an end user you can gain from them.
Mm-hmm. I have nothing against those terms, right? Because I think that you're absolutely correct that, look, this is a problem area and we need to solve it. What is the trouble is that, as soon as the terms appears, suddenly we have companies being, popping in and again, just increasing the complexity, which is the problem that until fairly recently, nobody has been talking about. It's just getting out of hand, right? Like if you would look at how many landscapes of modern data stack, show up on LinkedIn and every week, right? A few years ago, there will be 4 categories. Today we are up to 12. Where are we going to be 2 years from now? Like, this is not sustainable. And there's going to be some consolidation. Some companies will buy each other. That stuff is absolutely going to happen, right? We have everything unbundled. It will start bundling again. And yes, bringing the terms into the conversation exposes the cracks, and that conversation definitely needs to happen. I'm just hoping that every term won't mean another category, because again, that would be the customer who would suffer at the end.
That's a fair point. So we've covered a lot of ground today. Before we wrap, I want to ask a couple last questions here. So where can people find Keboola online if they want to know more?
Well, Keboola.com is a good start.
Spell that for the audience.
Oh, thank you very much. It's Keboola. Don't ask me about the history of the name. That's for a different conversation. But
likely over drinks, I imagine.
Something similar to that. Yes. What you can do, you can actually try it, right? I think that the one thing which is fairly unique about Keboola is that literally you can be one-person team or data engineer or consultant or freelance, and you can be using the same features, exactly the same environment as our enterprise customers who are not running our pay-as-you-go plan, but they have a private cloud deployment in their own Azure subscription, which gives us the advantage of companies that are evolving, knowing that whatever they're going to throw at us, as you're saying, the data stack work never ends. Chances are somebody already been there, right? And they're just following in those footsteps, which then leads to acceleration. We now have probably close to 10 of customers who started with us as a very, very small team, and then they made it through the unicorn status, which gives us a lot of pride, right? That they are still customers of ours. We are still their data environment, still their data solution, even though they are vastly different organizations than they were when we started talking, those few years ago. So again, start from Keboola.com. You can get your free trial there of one single project, which allows, even for free, running a small ETL processes or small workflow, or, just get in touch with us and we'll hook you up with a whole environment you can use to accelerate your data mesh journey, with the data catalog and the governance tools and all of those things as well.
So is this on-prem or SaaS only?
So we are a cloud solution, but we can run either in private cloud as a SaaS solution in Azure or AWS, or we can deploy in a private cloud, which happens for a lot of customers. We also have something called a hybrid solution, where the customer have their own databases, their own data warehouses, and we integrate with those. So we call it BYODB, bring your own database.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for your time. Anything else you want to share before we wrap?
I don't really think so. You asked so good questions, and I know that this was supposed to be more of a vendor presentation, and we had more of a conversation, which is always more fun. But maybe the one thing you were talking about at one point, and that is what is interesting about this space is that sort of the more patient you are, the faster you move. Right? There is that risk of really focusing on what is your problem today and looking for a quick solution, and eventually you just end up with a big ball of band-aids rather than a sustainable data stack. So please, as a closing thought, think ahead. Think about what is it that this organization that you are building a data stack for is going to likely need 2 years from now, and is what you're building today following that strategy and leading you in that, or is it going to design you in the corner and you'll have to rip and replace it in 2 years?
Yeah, I imagine it's going to be a mix of both. No, good closing thought. So there you have it, Milan from Keboola, and hopefully you got something out of this. Leave a comment, and we'll drop some links in the show notes. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well, and thanks for having me.